everybody, it's Daniel here, and welcome to Emotional English Podcast, the podcast where you learn an English language effortlessly, emotionally, filled with energy, and of course, positively. Welcome, everybody. Today is another day to learn English, and we have a special guest. 20 years ago, my guest discovered something most business people still don't know, that stories are more powerful than just data, slides, or logic. Since then, she's taking that message to Amazon, Uber, EY, and Obama Foundation. She's the best-selling author of 8 books. Her latest story, Intelligence, debuted #1 in Australia and the top Amazon charts in 4 categories. She is also the co-host of Keeping It Real with Jack and Ral, one of the Spotify's top 3% most shared podcasts. Please welcome, from Melbourne, Australia, Gabrielle Dolan. Gabrielle, hello. How are you today?
Hello, and thank you for that introduction. I'm very excited to be talking with you about all things storytelling today.
Awesome, Gabrielle. So, Gabrielle, I will start from the distrust age. We live in what you call the distrust age, right? And in the world where everybody's generating content, big corporation, just average people, right? The words of AI sounds pretty loud, right? But people, they trust this info less and less and less, right? So why is that happening, and what is the antidote for that?
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of the Edelman report. This is a global report that's been going for 20 years, and they produce a report every year, and it measures trust across governments, across organizations, across not-for-profits, and across the media. And trust has been on the decline, but this is in the 2025, when the report came out, it was the worst it's ever been. So people, and for the first time, people aren't trusting employees, which which was the research showed. So we're in a world of distrust. I think you've got to sort of see what's happening around fake news and things like that. It's contributing to that. But I also believe that AI is contributing to that. So deep fakes, AI generated content. I mean, if you look, I don't know what you do, but you look at videos now and you're sort of going, oh, that's really cool. And then you go, hang on, is that AI? So, I was thinking the other day about video, like cute animal videos. AI has destroyed that because now you're watching it and you actually don't know if it's real or not. So, and even the AI generated content, people are producing content and it's sort of like even going, it might be real, but it sort of doesn't sound like, it sounds a bit robotic because it's written by AI. So we are in an age of distrust where people have become really cynical about what they're consuming. And I don't know about you. When I grew up, it was like, my parents got the news from one TV channel and one newspaper, and it was almost like if it was on the TV or if it was in the newspaper, it was true. And most of the time that was the case, but now that's not the case. So we rightly so are very, very cynical. So there's lots of answers to that. I don't think there's a silver bullet, but one of them is I truly believe that our authentic stories are needed now more than ever before.
Awesome. So authenticity, right? This is a new currency we can call, right?
I think you're right. I think it is like a new currency or a superpower that if you're prepared to be truly authentic, it can help you stand out from everyone else.
Okay, and what does authentic actually look like in business context, right? If we discuss business area, so how does it look like?
Yeah, I run a lot of storytelling workshops, and in general, we have a conversation around authenticity. And to me, especially when it comes to storytelling or content, it has to be true. So your stories have to be true. You're not making up stories. So I think that's one part of authenticity. The other part of authenticity is you have to believe in what you're saying. So you can't, you could share a story about the importance of work-life balance, for example, but you have to believe in that. So and I think you need both of them to be authentic. So it's like your values need to be aligned with what you're saying, because you could be sharing a story around integrity, for example, and it could be a good authentic story, but if it's not aligned to what you do, then that can cause distrust. So the moment you're not aligned with what you're saying, as in your words and actions are not congruent, that can lead to distrust. And also, if you're making up stories, that will absolutely lead to distrust.
Thank you. Yes, it correlates with the philosophy of emotional English as well. When people are learning some content, they feel more comfortable when the story goes with emotions, with real experience, right? And this is the most productive option how people can learn things. I agree with that point as well. Yeah.
One of the powers in storytelling is when you share a story and it's an authentic story, you not only retell the story, but you relive it, and people sense that, people feel it, and that's where you can get the emotional connection. And it's not about being emotional, but people actually connect with the story and they connect with you. And if you're making up your stories, you're not going to achieve that. I mean, you'd want to be a brilliant actor if you're making up stories.
Right, right. People had this idea that fake it until you make it, but sometimes it just doesn't work. It's better to be realistic and be real, right? And it
Yeah,
sounds more
yeah. And
good,
and
I
I
guess.
sort of get the concept of fake it till you make it. And I often say fake it till you feel it. But I think it's like
Right,
that sometimes fake it till you make it is sort of when you're doing something and you don't quite have the confidence yet. You sort of got to pretend you're
right,
confident. But I think it's like
right.
sometimes I say just do it and your confidence will eventually catch up to you.
Absolutely. Right. So next point I want to discuss is the emotions versus logic. Nowadays, people they prepare the content. They always like looking for numbers, slides. They're so focused on the content there. So and especially our listeners from Russia, Europe, China, they have these problems as well. And how to have this switch from just logical AI thinking, right, to the more emotional state. Do you have any recommendations or maybe tips or tricks what people can do to be more focused on emotionality?
I when I talk about emotion and logic, it's I actually don't even bring AI into that conversation because I think the problem, and especially in business, we have too much of a focus on logic. So we think in business, if we present a very logical explanation why we need to do something, or if we're trying to sell a product or a service and logically this all makes sense, we think that's going to influence people. And it actually doesn't. Logic just informs us. You can go back way to, the Greek philosopher Aristotle, and he had this model of persuasion. So like 2,500 years ago, where he said to influence people and persuade people, you need three things. You need logic, you need emotional connection, and you need personal credibility. So he called them logos, ethos, and pathos. So you need logic, credibility as a person, and emotional connection. And the two most important things are credibility and connection, emotional connection. Yet in business, we think logic. We spend all this time on logic, trying to influence people through logic. And all logic does is inform people. It doesn't influence people. So you still need it. It still needs to make logical sense. But when we're trying to actually communicate and influence, we need to think about how we can get that credibility and connection, and a story can do that. Because and I often say to people, if logic did more than inform people, none of us would smoke, none of us would speed in our cars, we'd eat healthy and exercise every day, yet we don't, because logic just informs us. But it's the emotion that can actually persuade and change behaviors, which is critical in business. I mean, it's critical, a parent to a child, a teacher to a student, a salesperson to a potential client. It's critical in all of those situations.
Yeah, and what the line that really hits me is this one from your book, right? Facts tell, but stories sell, right? This is very true, right? It correlates with this philosophy so much. Thank you so much.
Because
Awesome.
it's because the reason that is correct is, as human beings, we make decisions based on emotion. So we think we're quite logical, but as human beings we are making emotional decisions, and we use logic to rationalize our decision. And whether we're buying, the latest iPhone or a new pair of shoes or a house or whatever, we make decisions based on emotion, and then we use logic to rationalize. I often share the example when me and my husband a couple of years ago, we walked into a house. We were sort of starting to look for a new house, but wasn't really committed. So we walked into this house, and within about a minute, we had both made the emotional decision to buy the house. Now, we're not fools, we're not stupid. We went home and we went through the logical numbers, but we were coming up with very logical reasons why we were spending about 20% more than what we'd planned to. So, the fact that the golf course was across the road was a very logical reason. Now, we ended up buying the house, but if we'd have gone through the logic and decided that doesn't make sense, this would be a really bad decision, we would have changed our mind, but it would have been a very reluctant change of mind because we've already bought in emotionally to that. And again, whether that's a personal thing like buying a house, or whether it's working for you or buying from you, we make emotional decisions.
The story about the house correlates with my story with my apartment. When I've been to Moscow, I had been living there for a while, and I was looking for an apartment. And I remember the first house I looked at, it's just, it hit me, right? And I realized, yeah, that's the house I want to live. And yes, maybe logic was not very clear to me, right? But this emotional hit was pretty big, and it's impacted a lot. Okay. The next point I want to discuss is the 4 types of stories you're mentioning in your book, right? I just have this question to you. If we imagine the person, he's a manager, or the person who is trying to be prepared for the presentation. So what kind of type of the storytelling he should pick, and why? Maybe you can give us a little bit deeper explanation how these types are working.
Yeah, let's spend a bit of time on this, because I'll go through the 4 types of stories, and then I might provide an example of 1 or 2 of them, and where you would use them, whether it's in a presentation, or you're, coaching mentoring someone, or even, again, talking to your kids or a salesperson. So the 4 types, they all start with P. So I'll just go through them really quickly and then go into more detail. So it's
Sure.
parable, public, professional, and personal. So let me start in reverse order around that. Okay. So your personal story is something that's happened to you. It's your story. But in regards to a business message, you want to communicate a business message, but it's a non-work related story. So it's happened in your personal life. And they are some of the most powerful stories you can share. The professional stories is it happened to you, but they're your work related stories. So if you think of the personal stories and the professional stories, they are your work, they are stories that have happened to you. One in a work situation, professional, one in a non-work situation, personal. So they're the 2. I think they're the 2 most powerful, and I'll talk a bit more about them later. Your other 2 stories, the public and the parable, these didn't happen to you. So public, for example, is a well-known public story. Like, there's lots of sporting stories, or there's stories about Steve Jobs, and innovation. So almost if you think if you Googled it or asked AI to find you a story on teamwork, it would give you one of these stories. So they're in the public domain. They didn't happen to you. And then parables are like fables, like Aesop's fables, like the boy who cried wolf, for example. So these are almost lateral examples, but they carry a message. So they're the 4 types. In where you would use them, and let me give you. I think what I'll do is I'll give you an example of a parable and a personal, because sometimes they can be the hardest to comprehend. I remember when I was at university, and I was doing, this was about 30 years ago, and one of the subjects was on competitive advantage. And I remember the lecturer, it was sort of, this concept of competitive advantage was quite new. And so the lecturer shared a parable. And the parable went like this. He said there was, imagine 2 CEOs go walking in the woods, and they come across an attacking grizzly bear. And the first CEO starts to grab a pair of runners out of his backpack and puts on his runners. And the second CEO says, "Are you mad? We can't outrun an attacking grizzly bear." And he said, "I know, but I sure as hell can outrun you." And that he used that to describe what competitive advantage was. It was sort of just keeping ahead of your competitors. I 30 years on, I still remember that story. It's probably one of the very few things I remember, but I remember that story. So that's an example of a parable, and you can teachers use them a lot. Um, they're they're good for passing on, teaching moments. So I mean, all stories can pass on teaching moment. That's an example of a parable. Public stories, like I said, just Google, you'll find something, and you can share a public story, like a case study. A lot of case studies are public stories. The professional stories, these are predominantly some of the stories that you would share in a job interview. So, when you're in a job interview and people go, can you tell me a time when you've done this? And you'll share a professional story. Or in a work situation, when you want to provide best practice and examples, you'll use a professional story or even a public story in that matter. The personal story, let me give you an example of what I mean by a personal story. So this is a story that didn't happen at work, but you're using it to communicate a work message. So imagine you're a leader. So one example I will share with you is, and I worked with this leader. So she was a leader and she was the head of risk. And what she found was a challenge, that every time she talked to people around risk management and would say to them, I can't manage your risk, all I can do is help you manage your risk. She said the message didn't quite get through. And she said, I've tried everything. She tried logic, examples. It didn't really work. So this is the story that she shared. She said, when I grew up on a farm, and growing up, there was all these dangers we needed to be aware of, but mum would teach us what to do. So we knew what to do when we came across redback spiders in the timber heap, and we knew about all the potential traps in the dam after heavy rain, and we knew what to do if we ever came across a snake in summer. And I remember this day, Mum was yelling at me to get my bike from the front gate. So I ran down to get my bike, and then I just froze, because in front of my bike was this massive copperhead snake. But I remembered everything Mum taught us to do. So I played statues, and I slowly walked backwards until there was enough space between me and the snake, and I ran back to the house to tell Mum. And I'm sharing this with you because it reminds me of the role we play in risk. All I can do is give you the skills, knowledge, and advice. So when you come across your own copperhead snake, regardless of what that looks like, you will know what to do. Now,
Wow.
Can I ask you just 3 questions about that latest story, which I think might tie back into what we were talking about before? Does that story help you understand the role of a risk manager better and the role that you play in risk?
I think yes, it does. I mean, you classically feel it. To be honest, I do have the goosebumps because I'm so scared of snakes. And when I'm imagining the snake, I'm already trying to run away. But this is very crucial, right? So it's already like a lesson that the mom taught to that lady, right? And she is sharing the same, lesson with us, right? Through her own experience.
Yeah, and so you understand the message, that it was like she can like her mum did. I can only teach you, so when you come across your own risk, you know what to do, and then that's the message she's trying to give to her team. So you understand the message. The second thing is, do you think you'll remember that story?
I guess so. Yes, because it's full of personal moments, right? It's a personal, and I felt this like that girl, I was into it.
Yeah. You will remember it. And let me talk a little bit about why you'll remember it and stories, because it ties back to emotion, what we were talking about. You will absolutely remember that story because it's tapped into emotion. And as human beings, I spoke about before, we make emotional decisions, but emotion helps us remember stuff. And you're not even aware it's tapped into emotion. You've got no control. It just has. Now, you said you had goosebumps. That's a sure sign that it's tapped into emotion. Now, you might have goosebumps because you're really scared of snakes, but for every person hearing that story, it's tapped into their emotion. Even if they love snakes, it's tapped into emotion. So it's helped you understand the message. You're going to remember it. And the third question, if you had to actually retell that story to someone else, do you think you could do it without losing its meaning? Like, you wouldn't do it word for word, but do you think you could sort of tell it and still get the message across?
I think I will have a chance to do so because I have this core foundation, this experience, and the lesson kind of stoned into that experience. I guess, yeah, I could do that.
Yeah, I think you could absolutely do it, and everyone listening to this would be able to do it in some way. So through the story, through a story, and this is the real power of a personal story because they're so different. It helps people understand the message. They'll remember it, when the meeting's over, when the conversation's finished, when the presentation's ended, they'll remember it, and then they will be able to retell it if they need to other people without losing its meaning. And when you think, as leaders, for example, when you're speaking to your team and you're trying to communicate something, you really want them to understand it. Like I really want them to understand the message, and then I want them to remember the message, and if they had to, they could retell others. So going back to your question about the 4 types of stories and where you would share them, I think if, say, you're doing a presentation, one of the most powerful ways to start a presentation is with a personal story. So if you're doing a presentation on risk management, you could start with your personal story that sort of becomes the metaphor. And Rosemary, who shared that story, does this, and she shares the story, and then she says, what I want to do today is to talk to you about identifying all the potential copperhead snakes in your business. So copperhead snake sort of becomes the metaphor. So I would say start with a personal story. I think then you would probably have some professional stories, so some work stories you could bring in. You may have a public story, best case, case studies and stuff like that. You may best practice. You may have a story, and you may have a parable. Now, you might not want to do all 4, but I would say personal story is a really powerful way to start and potentially end. And then have a few professional and public stories in there. And, how many stories, well, I sort of guess that depends on how long you're talking for, but you certainly need some stories in there. And it's almost like every time you present some logic or some facts or some figures or the latest stats on something, do that and then have a story to bring those stats to life. So if you're going, 27% of our people feel experience this, then go, for example, I was speaking to John the other day and he told me, and then share a story about, one of your employees or something.
Wow, that's beautiful. And, Emotional English uses the stories that I lived through, right? So I'm trying to share my personal stories at first, and then sometimes I use parables as well. Just, and philosophy idea, right? If we discuss philosophy, they use a lot of parables as well, right? Because we're imagining the concepts, right? So it's pretty implementable in every person's life fields, right? So if we discuss any field, it's very implementable, right? All of them. All right. Awesome. Awesome. So it's pretty productive. Now, talking of the storytelling in general, many stories people create by an AI, and AI start to replace personalities, right? And start to replace people with their stories. So it helps people to develop their stories, or it destroys their stories. What do you think? So where are we going?
Yeah, and it can do both of those. So
Right.
one of the premises of me writing the book is people started to ask me, will AI replace storytelling? It was like, no, it won't. And your stories are needed now more than ever. But then the questions came about, can you use AI to help with your stories? And initially I was going, no, you can't. But I did change my mind. And it's funny, over the last 18 months, I've seen changes. So I would say, you can absolutely use AI to help find your story. So say, for example, you were trying to find a story on teamwork or innovation. And if I was sitting down with you over a coffee and you said, I really want to share a story, but I just can't think of any, the first thing I would do is ask you a whole lot of questions, can you think of a time when you tried something different? Or can you think of a time when you didn't have the courage to try something different? I would ask you all these questions, and I guarantee you would think of a story. So the first thing is you can use AI to help with that. So literally put in the prompt, act as my storytelling coach. I'm looking for a story on innovation X, whatever it is. Can you ask me questions to prompt stories? So you it'll come back with all these prompts, and I guarantee you'll find a story. So that's a really good way to help with the creative process of finding stories. I did say in the book that you can use AI to then help you refine stories, like, because the danger then is AI will go, tell me a little bit about it and I'll create a story for you. But then the real danger with getting AI to check everything you do and getting it to write your stories is, first of all, is it true? So if you're using AI to write your stories or refine them, polish them up a bit, you got to make sure it's still true, because we all know that AI likes to hallucinate and make things up. But you've got to be really careful that you don't lose your voice in it, and the telltale signs. And there's such telltale signs with AI stuff that it's like, a lot of AI go, if it's not X, it's Y. And, we are living in a world of unprecedented times and all that type of like just stuff. So
Right.
you don't want to lose your voice, because if you are losing your voice in the process of using AI, what you're putting out there, and this is whether it's storytelling or not, it could just be content, like a LinkedIn post, for example, or a newsletter, it will start to sound like AI. And coming back to our very first discussion around trust, the moment anyone starts to think this was written by AI, what they do is they stop reading and they stop listening, because it's like, I'm not reading this, so it's losing its impact. And so you don't fall into the trap of getting AI to polish everything, because it polishes it so much that it starts to sound robotic, because it's written by a robot. So that's my real concern with how we're starting to use AI too much for that.
Thank you for your points. And I can add just one more thing. I think the best example who are using the AI for creating the narrative or the storytelling, it's the people who want to be perfect. Like when people think about the idea of perfectionism, right? I want to be perfect in this area, in that area, right? They are pushing themselves and they want to be perfect. And they think that AI would polish it that way, that it would look amazing. But this is the moment where we lose ourselves, right? This is our voice that we're losing, right? And maybe that is the key point, what we're losing the most, right?
Yeah, and that's
Okay.
and that's a really good point. And I've been guilty of that myself, because I try to use AI almost as a spell check and a grammar check, and I put it through, and I even sometimes use the prompt, just spell check this. So I don't want it to change anything. I just want it to spell check it, and it will come back and it's changed it. And it's like, so then I have to like reread it all again to make sure that there's nothing in there that I disagree with or that doesn't sound like me. So that's, yeah, we think, yeah, I think you're right. I think we're going, but we want it to be really good, and we fall into this trap of AI spits us back something and we go, oh, that sounds good, but it doesn't sound like you. And it'd be better to sound like you and imperfect than sounding perfect, whatever perfect means. And you think it might be perfect, but then your readers or your listeners are going, that just sounds like AI to me.
Indeed. So, by the way, if someone is listening here, who is listening our podcast, the student, imagine the student or a professional or someone who is really scared to speak English, right? That's my main audience, actually. They want to develop, but they scared of this type of development. So, can you maybe give us a little point of what they should get from our today's discussion the most, right? The main point of today's discussion, what they should take, right?
Yeah, actually, that's a good point. I run a lot of training workshops around the globe, and I have been in for leadership teams that are people from all different countries that don't speak English is not their main language, and so they're all speaking and they're not very good at English. What I've found is that when they communicate with the story, even though their English isn't perfect, the way it's a story and they're sort of almost acting it out a little bit, that you can actually follow along a lot more easily. I remember this distinctly when I did a workshop for an Asia Pacific team, and there was people from China, there was people from Thailand, Singapore, and Japan, and the man from Japan probably had. I found him the hardest to understand in his English, but the moment he shared the story and he was acting it out, I completely followed it. I had no problem understanding what he's saying. So I would say that story has the capacity to communicate more effectively if you're speaking in a language that's not your first language.
Wow, that's beautiful. That's the main point of the whole discussion for these people who are looking for essentials, right? And it's true. Thank you so much for that. And just to conclude, I just want to thank you for this beautiful discussion. We had an amazing discussion. We didn't use and didn't discuss boring grammar books or different scripts, right? We just thought of the whole concept, right, in general, and it was great. And I just want to mention that if our listeners want to meet you or to find your books, so we have our links down below to this video. And just guys, go ahead, look for the Gabrielle's book, Story Intelligence. It's a very interesting one. And if you want to get some more links or look for Gabrielle's podcast, there is a link down below as well. And I think we can wrap up this beautiful podcast episode with you, Gabrielle. Thank you for being here with us today. Thank you for sharing your knowledge, your experiences. It means a lot to us as a community who trying to learn the language. And we will try to spread your point on storytelling around the globe. So there are many listeners from China. There are many listeners from all over the places. So thank you all for being with us here. And I hope to call you and talk to you later on.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you all for listening. It was a beautiful episode with Gabrielle. I'll hope to see you very soon in the next episode. Take care.